Inside the Game, episode 3, right here on One Soccer and the One Soccer digital platforms. And I am Gareth Wheeler. Now, we just started this, our isolation broadcast, just a week ago. And I want to thank all of you out there for the real positive responses thus far. And our guests, they've been fantastic. Craig Forrest on what early life in the Barclays Premier League looked like. He was one of 11 foreign players in the first year. Great storytelling. And the head coach of the Canadian men's national team, John Herdman, on Tuesday night. He was great as well. And I'm really excited about tonight's guest. He has so many stories to tell, but just very quickly before, I want to remind you to subscribe to One Soccer on YouTube and to follow across all of our social channels for all of our isolation programming. So for those that are new to the show, the concept is relatively simple. Have really cool guests on and have them explain what makes them tick and how they drive the game forward here in North America. So we shine the spotlight on them and have them tell their stories and tell you what really matters to them. Just think inside the actor's studio with James Lipton, but I'm certainly am not James Lipton, and we're not in an actor's studio. We are in my house. So without further ado, hope you enjoy tonight. And tonight's guest, well, he has quite the resume and remains one, if not the most recognizable member of the U.S. men's national team of all time. The world took notice of him back in 1994, USA 94, his top performances and his standout style. And as a ginger young player myself, I really looked up to this guy watching him growing up in the 80s and 90s. He was an absolute favorite of mine. He was part of the inaugural New England Revolution side in Major League Soccer, a U.S. Player of the Year, an MLS All-Star, a Best 11. He's done everything on the executive side of things, general manager, a president as well. He's done it all in the North American game. Now he's one of the top voices and analyst for One Soccer. And oh yeah, he happens to be a rock star as well. We'll try to get into all of that over the next little bit. There simply isn't enough time in the day for this guy. So I wonder how he's holding up right now. I want to welcome Alexi Lalas to the broadcast. Alexi, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was a hell of an introduction. I hope I live up to it. The folks that you mentioned previously on this show, I got a lot to live up to, as a matter of fact. So that was wonderful. Hopefully, I can give you something interesting and entertaining as we go along. But as you know, we're all kind of muddling through this together. These interesting times that we are living in, and we were talking earlier off air about content and all that kind of stuff. So you got to kind of throw some stuff at the wall and see what works and see what doesn't. Down here with Fox Sports, we're trying to do as much different stuff as we possibly can, and everybody's trying to do it. And you're mining stuff that maybe you haven't mined before, and you're going back to stuff that you have mined and just trying to go a little bit deeper. But it does, like you said, give us an opportunity to kind of delve into some different avenues. And like I said, get a little bit deeper here and there, either with people or with stories out there. So maybe that's a little bit of a silver line, but I hope everybody is staying safe and sane out there. I'm in my house here like you, and I got kids running all over the place. We're just trying not to kill each other, and we're hoping that this ends soon. So it's a pleasure to talk with you today.
Absolutely. I mean, this provides time because as the news cycle goes, you just try to keep up with the game on a number of different levels. This gives us a chance to catch our breath and reflect a little bit on things that have happened and where things are going. So, and by the way, that intro, that's just your resume, Alexi. You lived that all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a moron at heart. I might have changed a little bit, or at least cleaned up a little bit. I mean, you mentioned the hair, and never has so much been done with a modicum of talent and a little bit of hair gel and stuff like that. I recognize that one of the reasons why I'm sitting here talking to you today is because of the 1994 World Cup and how that summer just completely changed my life. So it's all kind of stems from that, but there's a whole history before that, and it involves on the field, off the field, soccer, other sports. Involves a lot of Canadian stuff, to be quite honest with you. Growing up in Detroit, and notwithstanding the flag I got behind me, I got a lot of love for my friends up there in the Great White North. One of the first albums I remember growing up was Bob and Doug McKenzie, and listening to that. So there's a lot of Canadian in me.
No kidding. It always is striking when you cross the border, whether it's through Windsor or through Buffalo. You always see Labatt Blue or Molson just advertised everywhere, right, when you cross over the border. So you know what we're all about.
Oh, I know about. I once had a party when I was in high school, and my friends snuck down to my basement. My parents were out of town, and they stole my dad's stash of Labatt's Blue. And I said, listen, you got about 24 hours to go and try to replace that. They went and they got beer and they put it and they said, all right, we've replaced it. Everything's good. My dad came home. He went down in the basement and he came back upstairs and said, listen, I'm not angry that you had a party. Okay. That's going to happen. You're going to be a moron. I get that. Okay. But at least have the decency to replace it with the same beer. And they had put
Exactly.
completely different beer in there and thought they were going to get away with it. So that's my Labatt's Blue story.
All right. You can't, you need to differentiate between Labatt Blue and PBR. You just
Right.
have to. It's not the same thing. Speaking about your father, like, it's always interesting to me how people get into what they do. Your father was a professor, your mother was a poet, and you become this rock star of a soccer player. How does that happen, Alexi?
I grew up in a very educationally based type of household. I grew up in a household where we had debates and arguments. You had to take different sides, and you weren't left alone just to say whatever or anything like that. I grew up in a household that wasn't a lot of sports. Like you mentioned, my father was a professor at Wayne State University and also worked for the government, going back and forth between Athens, Greece, and Detroit, Michigan. And my mom has always been a writer. She wrote books and a poet, and also worked for Chrysler, as most people at some
Really?
point have somebody in their family that works in the auto industry. But it's not to say that they weren't supportive of my sports. It's just that wasn't part of their background. But once they saw that their eldest, who it has to be said, if they had their druthers and if they had had their dream, it was not for him to go on and be a professional athlete or anything like that. But once they saw that this was something that I was good at, it kept me out of trouble. They were incredibly supportive of it. And so I grew up in the same way that a lot of kids still grow up today. I grew up with mom and dad coaching and orange peels and juice boxes at halftime and travel teams and going back and forth because we know it's the law down in Michigan. You got to play hockey. And I actually played probably more at times more hockey than I was playing soccer just because of the weather and the way the seasons
Sure.
lined up and indoor soccer and all that kind of stuff. So I was doing a lot of different things and then a lot of stuff at school too with the music and performing arts and all that kind of stuff. So my mom made sure that I was well-rounded. As much as I loved sports and gravitated towards it, she was adamant that I do as many different things as possible.
So, as a soccer and hockey player, I mean, did you have a choice which path you wanted to take? Were you good enough at hockey?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I love playing hockey, and we flooded the backyard, and we would go down to the ponds, and we would, and then one of my best friends when I was in middle school, his dad was the coach of the varsity hockey team at the school that I went to, and we would travel with whether it was whether I was playing club hockey or was I was playing for the high school, we would travel over to I don't know, Nichols Academy over there in Buffalo or Upper Canada College up there in Toronto or, down to different places. And so hockey was a huge, huge part of my life and a huge portion of the year was spent playing hockey. But it was always about what you wanted to do. And I really started to, be much more into soccer when well, obviously I was good at it, but more importantly I enjoyed the international aspect of it. I love the
Right.
fact that when I walked out onto my driveway and I was 10, 11 years old, I knew that there was another 10 or 11-year-old on the other side of the world that was doing the same thing, bouncing the ball off his head, juggling, seeing how many times he could juggle, all that kind of stuff. And that type of connection was something that was unique to soccer and certainly unique growing up in the 70s and 80s in North America and in Detroit. So it just really spoke to me. And from then on, I was hooked.
Was there a point or a moment where it came to you that you're actually good enough at it, and there was a path that was there to be taken where you could do this professionally, where you could take it to the next level?
I mean, somebody asked me that the other day, and the posters on my wall growing up were of I kid you not, musicians and hockey players. I had Steve Eiserman over here, or Daryl Sittler over here, or different people like
I feel like
that.
all my friends growing up,
All
honestly,
right,
same
all right.
thing.
So I mean, that's I mean, I would like Saturday nights were huge for me in Detroit because I would sit down and we used to get CBC across the border there. And I would sit there and I would have my root beer and my potato chips and get ready for hockey night in Canada. It was huge, huge for me what hockey was. Um, and like I said, I was growing up in a very hockey centric culture, so that's what was on my wall. And then obviously all the music and whether it was, Van Halen or AC/DC or Rat or Def Leppard or all these different groups that were on the wall. But I didn't have soccer players that I looked up to. The first World Cup I ever saw was 1986. I saw a few games. I was at a tournament in Colorado, Pikes Peak Invitational, I think it was called. And when they set up a TV in the lobby of the Holiday Inn there, it was like, big tournament, a million games a day. And I watched and I saw Diego Maradona. And by the way, I also saw Canada play. And I will tell you right now, it made me incredibly proud because of where I was growing up and the proximity and all the connections to Canada, to watch the Canadian national team play in a World Cup, because I had never seen World Cups and I had not, obviously at that point, seen an American team perform in the World Cup. So I was already connected to the Canadian culture and lifestyle at an early age when it came to a lot of different things, including soccer.
See, I was 6 during that 1986 World Cup, so I was aware that that it happened, but I had no recollection until 1990. So I haven't had my Canada in the World Cup experience. I haven't had an enjoyment on that level quite yet. And that's the thing, you kind of remember these moments that kind of paved the path towards 1994. I remember playing in the USA Cup in Minneapolis in 1992, and Pele came, and that was a big deal. And things were really building in the country at that time. But for a player like you, traveling around, playing in tournaments, there wasn't that clear path. Like MLS academies, like these were not a thing. So you went on to Rutgers University to play. At that level, like what was the caliber? What was the level of player that you were playing with and who was around you?
Yeah, so I had grown up, like you said, in the suburbs of Detroit, and I had achieved some level of success when it came to soccer. And I knew I wanted to play soccer in college. Like you said, that was the path at that time. It's changed now, but
Sure.
that was the path to go, even for elite players. Having said that, I wasn't recruited like an elite player. And I remember, another poster on my wall were rejection notices at a lot of these colleges that I thought, and look, soccer was going to have to help me get into these places, and ultimately it didn't. And Rutgers was one of the ones on the bottom of the stack of possibilities. And the only reason I knew about it because was I'd seen an article in Soccer America, and Peter Vermes, who is also a legendary soccer player, had played at Rutgers, and so I was infatuated by this concept. My dad drove me 16 hours out to meet the coach. I had never been to either New Jersey, let alone exit 9 off the turnpike at Rutgers University. I got out of the car. They met me. They said, look, we can invite you to preseason and we can get you into the agriculture school. Now, I grew up in Michigan, but I did not grow up on a farm, but it was the best thing that I had going. And so I said, thank you very much. I did absolutely everything wrong in terms of how you pick a school if you're fortunate and privileged enough to be able to go to a college. But it worked out great because it was a wonderful program. They were kind of going through a rebuilding year. So playing time was available. And I came in there with all guns blazing and never looked back.
You got your first cap against Mexico in 1991. I mean, it was different then. And even your team that played in the 1994 World Cup, many of those players were part of the U.S. men's national team program. You weren't club tied. There wasn't the opportunity there. So, how did you get your first call up? How did that come about, Alexi?
So initially, right before the '90 World Cup, I got called in for a couple of different camps. Actually, up in Vancouver at what's it called, Swan Garden or whatever. What the thing? We played against Canada and Mexico up there in a tournament there, and then I went on and played in the Olympics in '92. So I was part of that Olympic program that fostered a core of players that then matriculated up in 1993 to go into residency. And you're absolutely right. If you look at my generation, we got a lot of caps, and the reason is because for basically 2 years out of necessity, we went into residency getting ready for the '94 World Cup. And it was churn them and burn them type of thing. You would come in and guys would last a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then they'd be gone. And you just wanted to stay there. We were on month-to-month contracts, and you just wanted to be there when the music stopped and have a chair when the World Cup came in 1994. But none of us had ever played like myself and Kobe Jones. When we stepped on the field in 1994, we had never been on the books of a club. All of our experience was international. We did it completely backwards. Usually you do well in a club situation, you're recognized, then they call you up to the national team, you do well, and then you go on from there. We had none of that. All of our experience was international, but for all intents and purposes, we functioned as a club side for 2 years. And that'll never happen again, but it was absolutely crucial in terms of our development as a team And I believe without that, there's no way we could have had the impact and the success that we had in 1994.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. In retrospect, that had to be a positive, as other national teams were just kind of coming together. You spend it, what, 3 weeks before the tournament building up to it, but you knew these players. And out of that group of players that played in '94, some iconic individuals you played with. You mentioned Kobe Jones and yourself, two of the most recognizable players in American soccer. John Harkes, Tab Ramos, like Ernie Stewart. And before you came on, I watched back the highlights of your famous victory over Colombia. And the goal that Stewart scored, it was an incredible touch. It was a wonderful goal. It was a well-earned victory. And there was just so much talent in that side that emerged from within. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
which goes completely against the grain.
It was also, I mean, look, I think that we also recognized the responsibility that we had.
Right.
And by the way, we're going to, in a few years from now, in 26, all three nations are going to have that responsibility. And, we felt that, look, we don't want to embarrass ourselves. We're going to bring a lot of people in the tent here that haven't been to the tent or didn't even know a tent existed. And people are going to be exposed to high level soccer and what soccer can be in the United States for the first time. And we want to make sure that when all is said and done, they can watch their team and through their team be proud of not just their team and their country, but of the way that the sport is growing. And so that was always a responsibility that we didn't take lightly. We also recognized that our responsibility went well beyond what we did on the field in terms of kicking the ball. We had a responsibility to be those as ambassadors and pioneers and spread that gospel around. And I tell you what, to a man, we all took it seriously, and nobody, look, we whine and complain because that's what players do. But for the most part, we knew that that was part and parcel of being an American soccer player. And I don't think that that's a trait that has necessarily changed. I think it applies to a lot of different countries, especially emerging and evolving countries when it comes to the game. You've got to be able to do that and recognize that while you are a professional soccer player, that is not the only thing in
Right.
terms of your job description, kicking the ball.
The branding and momentum up to that tournament, it was unreal. Like, I bought a USA '94 starter jacket, winter jacket, to wear with the famous logo that's kind of like the flag that's behind you, Alexi. Like, did you and your teammates understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold and the momentum with Bill Clinton being like celebrities all over the place, playing an NFL football stadium in front of anywhere between 50 to 95,000 people? Like, were you guys prepared? Did you understand what you were walking into?
Not really. I mean, I'd be lying if I told you that we did. We knew this was big, and but once again, there was no context. None of us had better. Some of us hadn't, but especially younger guys like myself, we hadn't been anywhere, so we were too dumb to really recognize what we were getting into. I will tell you this story. A couple weeks before the World Cup in '94, I got on an airplane, and I got in my middle seat like we did in economy and traveling wherever we were going. I sat next to a nice older lady, and we had struck up a conversation. She asked me, what do you do? I said, well, I play soccer. She said, well, no, what's your job? I said, well, I play soccer. And she said, well, what do you do for money? I said, ma'am, I play soccer. And 2 weeks later, I'm in front of 1 billion people playing in the World Cup. And that's just to give you a little context and to show you what the general public was. And this explosion, this wonderful explosion of color and sound that was the World Cup really opened up a lot of people's eyes. Now, not everybody became soccer fans overnight, but that's not what it's about. It's about just getting a few people or as many people in as possible and keeping as many of them. And that's how MLS came about a couple of years later. But just the understanding, and I use this word a lot, the relevancy of soccer just started to increase. And it's night and day, when I look back 25 years to what it is now. But that's what ultimately this is all about, is gaining relevancy in the eyes and the hearts and minds of people that you want to convert to the game that we know and love.
And people loved it. The opening ceremonies. Diana Ross, did you expect her to miss the penalty? I mean, it had everything. It was done in such an American way, and it resonated as well. Were you surprised just how big it got and how well received it was, and not just by the people that knew the game, but people outside the game as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, once we were in the thick of things, we realized what '94 was doing to the general sports audience, to the to America and to people there. And we also realized that this was changing us individually, and a lot of us were living the dream. I mean, It was nuts. And, when you do well and people see you, and obviously the way that I looked and all the, the costume, I always considered myself a performer and an entertainer. And I know some people cringe at times when you say that, but you practice something and then you go on stage, and stage is basically the same thing as a field, and you have a public out there. And I wanted to make sure that my costume was right. Make sure the performance was right.
That
And
was
doesn't mean that it
intentional.
can't
That
be
was
genuine.
intentional. Big
Yeah,
goatee, big hair.
goatee and the hair and all that kind of stuff, but doesn't mean you can't be truthful. It doesn't mean you can't be genuine and authentic when you go out there. And that's what it was, and it resonated, and it changed my life forever in terms of giving me opportunities on and off the field that I never would have had.
See, it's a brash and bold move, but it only works if you play well, right?
Yep,
Like
yep. You got
if
to
you
remind
play
yourself. And
well.
I had lots of people around me that reminded me of that. And whether it was coaches or friends, I made sure that, look, you got to get that balance right. It's all fine and well to be, colorful and exuberant and all that kind of stuff, but you got to match it with what goes on in the field. And sometimes that balance got out of whack, and you need somebody to come up and
That
smack
must
you
have
in the
been
face and say, you better get yourself together.
no, well, it must have been even that much cooler the fact that your first game of the tournament was essentially in your backyard in the Pontiac Silverdome, which isn't there anymore. But man, like I'm sorry, I'm just putting two and two together. Now
It's
that must
crazy.
have made
It's
that an
crazy.
extra special experience for you.
Like 10 minutes away from where I grew up. I had been to the Silverdome many times to either see concerts or to see the Detroit Lions play. I had actually been there also to see
Detroit
the
Lions
Detroit
lose.
Express.
Detroit Lions lose. More
Yeah,
like
sorry, that's true. Yeah, but I had actually been to a soccer game to see the Detroit Express, because the Express, when I was growing up, signed Trevor Francis. I'll never forget. He wore white shoes, and I was, that was, you talk about people that first came on your radar. That was the first time that I had even seen any professional soccer players. And this was, wow, this is Trevor Francis. He's from England. He's wearing white shoes. That's what stood out to me. Not that he was a brilliant goal scorer or anything like that.
just a white
But
shirt.
yeah, it was full circle to come back and play a World Cup, the first game happening and by the way, still to this day, the only indoor men's World Cup game to happen. So it was pretty special.
So that was in front of, I believe, 73, 74,000 people. Your second match, almost 94,000 in the Rose Bowl, the famous victory over Colombia, which was one of the biggest upsets in World Cup history. What, what do you remember of that day, the buildup, the reaction? It just must have been, like, I know some players and some teammates of yours say it's all a blur now, but was
Yeah.
it a blur for you?
Yeah, it's a blur. I mean, I see the pictures, but I think of it as one of the great days in my life. And I'm asked about that game more than any other game for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is unfortunately what happened a couple weeks later with Andres Escobar, the center back, getting murdered. And it's so weird because I make a point of trying to separate it out, even though they will be forever linked. But I make a point of trying to separate it out to try to just have people understand how important that game was and how we can still celebrate it and take great joy that that was such an accomplishment, because we win that game. Colombia, Pele had picked them to win the World Cup. We win that game, and for all intents and purposes, we are through to the next round. We have accomplished our first goal. We're not going to embarrass ourselves or our country. And so it was a really, really important moment. And yet, I think, and I don't want to speak for everybody on the team, but I would venture to say that we would all trade that back in an instance and lose that game if it meant in any way that what happened a few weeks later to Andreas wouldn't happen. And so it's this weird it's this weird way of looking at both one of the greatest days of my life and yet one of the saddest because of the outcome a few weeks later. And they are forever linked, and there's no way to take them apart. But I will say that when people ask me what's one of the great days of your life, without a doubt, beating Colombia in the World Cup
Well,
in
yeah,
'94.
I mean, ESPN did the wonderful documentary, The Two Escobars,
Yep.
and that just shows you it just wasn't just about that match for Escobar. But if people out there, if you go back and watch the ball that John Harkes played, it was a great ball to the far post. If he's not there, the ball could have been in the back of the net anyways. I mean, it was just one of those things, a great ball played, an unfortunate bounce, and Escobar just went all
And
wrong.
every defender has dealt with that ball around the back of the back four or a back three. And you're running towards your goal. And you know that if you let it go, that guy's going to be just, cherry picking out there on that side and tap it in. So you got to make a play on it. And what he did, every defender has done it. And I've done it. And it just happened in the worst possible moment. Now, from a U.S. perspective, like you said, that's a dangerous ball. Put it in dangerous in dangerous areas and things can happen. So, well done to John Harkes for hitting that type of ball. And then, we went on and won that game. and it was a real accomplishment. Bora was so happy for us. We were so happy to have achieved that goal. And we got that moment. We got that moment with the flags and the music and all that kind of stuff that you kind of dream of watching. When I watched the U.S. Olympic team in 1980, and you have that you know that whole moment in your mind of how it's supposed to happen. It's wonderful when you actually are able to live one of those. And I was really lucky and fortunate to be part of a team that did that day.
I look at you as being Hollywood in your own right to you guys after because everyone was
Yeah,
watching.
yeah, it's amazing who comes out. I mean, I remember doing shots of tequila with the guys from Metallica and Robin Williams showing up, and then next thing you know, I'm on the Tonight Show and Letterman and all these different things. So my world completely exploded, and I went from just being a kind of oddity and curiosity within the soccer world to everywhere I went. It was, and because of the way that I looked, it was there's that soccer guy. And I'll be honest with you, I milked it for all it was worth. I had a blast doing it. I don't regret any of it. It was look, you don't do that if you don't have a healthy ego. And as I said before, I've always considered myself a performer. I enjoyed that, and I wanted to back it up with a good performance as many times as possible. But everywhere that you went, and that all the trappings and all the problems at times that come with it, but they weren't that bad. The problems. I mean, as long as
No
you
kidding.
got people around you, like I said, to kick you when you're being a moron. That's the best. That's the best part about it. And I had a wonderful time. And like I said, all these opportunities came after that.
Well, it's an experience that it's incredible that you actually lived that because it's kind of dreamland stuff for most American kids or Canadian kids, North American kids growing up, just dreaming to be in a position like that, in a stage like that, to take advantage of those type of things. Like these things don't come around all the time, and while you're living life large at that time, there's still a footballing education going on because although you qualified, you ended up finishing third place in your group, and a lot of people might not know there was only 24 teams playing in
Right.
the World Cup at that time, and it meant that you had a date with the world champions in Brazil, or the team that ended up winning that tournament in Brazil. And Bebeto scored the match winner that day, a team with Romario. I mean, what was it like going up against a team of that quality with so many special players, really from top to bottom?
Yeah, I mean, it was you talk about performance and the cinematic scope, all that kind of stuff. July 4th up at Stanford against Brazil, which, like you said, were the eventual winners with all the star power that we had. Now we had played Brazil a number of times before that, so while we knew they were one of the great teams in the world, it wasn't as if we were scared. And we gave a good account of
Yeah.
ourselves. And losing to the eventual champions is certainly no there's certainly no shame in that. That game was marked by a lot of different things, including losing Tab Ramos to at the elbow to the head, and so we went up a man, but we couldn't really capitalize on that, and so we went out of the tournament. But we went out with our heads held high. We went out in a moment, and certainly against a team that there, as I said, there's no shame in losing to. But there was also the end of an era because, like I said before, for a lot of us, we had trained twice a day for almost 2 years, and the World Cup all of a sudden it shows up. And then it's gone, and poof, the World Cup's done. And now everybody is, well, where do we go? What do we do from now? Because keep in mind that it was a Wild West type of existence when it came to professional soccer in the United States and North America. MLS hadn't come about. And so there was really kind of a wondering by all of us is what do we do now?
Yeah, no kidding. Before we go on what happened next, you were named as an honorable mention for team of the tournament as well. Do you think you got snubbed? Do you think that you played well enough to be in the best 11?
I don't want to be greedy. I mean, look,
Be honest.
I didn't realize that, and people started to tell me it wasn't like a ceremony or anything like that. But it was, it's nice to be recognized. You mentioned the guys on that team, and I think we have absolutely improved as a soccer playing nation, and we have players that are very, very good and probably better than a lot of us. I'd love to see what that team would look like against this version in 2020. but you're talking about your Tab Ramos, who I is one of the best, and I'd say the best player that I ever played with from an American perspective. A man out of time. He was slumming it by playing with us. Believe me, he was so good. And there were times where I just kind of was embarrassed to be out there on the field with him because he was doing things not that I hadn't seen an American do, that I hadn't seen a soccer player do. John Harkes, another legend, Tony Miola in goal, Eric Winalda up top. You mentioned Ernie Stewart. And the good part is, if you look at that team, almost to a man, everybody is still involved in the game in one way or the
Yeah.
other. And that's also the legacy of all of this is while a career can be incredibly important and in times, in my case, certainly defining, you have to be able to go on. And the creation of soccer and the work to get soccer better on and off the field is also creating opportunities after you play. And so I remain incredibly proud of all of those guys for what they did then, but kind of what we all had a part in establishing with a whole lot of other people, men and women off the field that deserve as much credit. But from a player perspective of establishing something there that has enabled us to function as adults even after we stopped kicking the ball and given us opportunities along the way.
96 caps for country. You couldn't just make it on the field 4 more times. All it
I
took was
ask that. I
four.
ask that all the time. Even back when Bruce Arena was coach and Bob Bradley, I say, hey, come on, just throw me a bone here. Let me come in. I'll just run around for a little bit. I'm not going to embarrass you or anything like that. So it's all right. It's fine. I had a really good run. And incredibly, proud. The wins and losses and the games. That's all fine and well. But there's nothing like putting on that jersey, putting your hand over your heart, singing that anthem for a country that you love. In this case, I'm biased. I know I think it's the greatest country in the world, but that privilege and that moment that you get, there is nothing like it. And I'm turning 50 this year, and if Greg Berhalter, the coach of the U.S. men's national team, if I was at a game and he turned up and looked up in the stands and said, "Hey, Alexi, can you give me 20?" I would be running down the aisle and jumping on that field. That's how much I loved playing, and the pride that I took and that we all took in representing the United States.
We'll make sure that Greg knows about that. Okay.
Hey, he's got enough problems.
uh, if you can compare the lasting impact of 1994, can a similar impact come from 2026?
That's what I was thinking about when you were talking about how, I lived that power of what a World Cup can do to an individual. What I'm excited about for 2026 is that there's a whole nother group of players, whether it's the U.S. team or the Canadian team or any team for that matter, but in particular, the U.S. and Canadian team that are going to get this platform again. And they're, many, many years from now, there'll be somebody like myself who will be talking about, yeah, back in 2026, I lived the power of what a World Cup can do to an individual. Now, we might not even have heard of this player yet. Maybe some of us have, but maybe he is just kind of, waiting in the wings until that moment comes, and then has that magical moment during that summer that changes his life forever. I love that magic, that magic wand that can hit you and your life is never the same. And that's really like what the power of World Cup can do. So absolutely, it can not only for individuals, but for the sport, it's crucial. I mean, 1994 was a seminal moment. It changed everything when it comes to the United States and the way that we view soccer. And I don't know if there's an MLS without 1994, and I don't know if there's a whole generation. You're amazed at how many people still come up to me and say, that changed it for me. That's when I fell in love, or that's when it was on my radar. And then by 98 and then by 2002 and stuff like that, this was constantly in my diet. And so that's what you need.
See, that was the thing when we were getting games that were played professionally from overseas, they'd be a week late and
Yep.
you only get what was provided to you, which was limited. So when young players like me were growing up, we'd say, "Oh, I'm Romario or I'm Ben Bastian or a player of that ilk." You gave us the opportunity, us defenders out there, to say, "Well, I'm Lawless out there." And now it's almost like this generation are so spoiled because they have access to basically everything and they can pick and choose, whether it's through their video game or what they see on television on a weekly basis or a daily basis, on who they're going to support. So there's just so much more access and so much more knowledge of what we're going into this, which maybe will bring more scrutiny as well. So maybe these players will be under even more pressure than whatever you felt back in 94.
Yeah, but my brain goes like this. All right, more pressure, more attention, more opportunity. And so, it depends on how you
Right.
on how you looked at it. I loved as I said, the performance aspect of it. I didn't even care if people were booing, to be quite honest with you. I mean, when we went down to Azteca to play, or down to Saprissa Stadium in Costa Rica, wherever it ended up being, I just loved the reaction to it. I was a junkie for that type of stuff. And people are wired differently, but I loved doing that. And there will be players that will rise to the occasion and see, yeah, there's a lot of people. And in this information age that we live right now, you're absolutely right. The amount of soccer that people that come to North America, they're always amazed and they're so jealous of us because we have so much soccer. And out of necessity, we've kind of had to do that and become incredibly educated. I still say North American soccer fans are the most educated out there when it comes to it, because we've had to be with this inevitable compare and contrast that we do. But
Exactly.
it also means that we're constantly looking at different things. So I think there will be a real opportunity if those players look at it as an opportunity. If they shine, they're shining in front of a world that is instantaneously connected. They do something great that is shot around the world, and billions of people instantaneously are able to pull up their phones or whatever and see it done, which is amazing. And that didn't exist back in 94.
Coming out of the World Cup, all kinds of opportunities started to present itself. You became the first American player to ever play in Serie A, which is quite the accomplishment. That's forever, Alexi. Forget about 100 caps. First ever in
Scorched
Serie A,
earth.
that's something else. And you were part of the inaugural season of Major League Soccer, which this week we've flashed back and seen all the mullets and the style of play of Major League Soccer in its first year as well. Which are you more proud of being a part of? The first American in Italy in Italian football, or being part of the launch of Major League Soccer?
Oh, I'm more proud of coming back for Major League Soccer. And I say that because it goes back to what I said about that responsibility. And even when I left to go, like I said, opportunities. I had an opportunity to go to EPL in England. I had the opportunity to go Bundesliga, so I had to go to Germany and then Italy. And this was back before the Bosman ruling and the opening of the European community. And Serie A was the be all and end all the great players, all the most money, all the most prestige. There was only one place that I was going. And it was wonderful. What an experience. I grew as a player and I grew as a person living in that fishbowl. And like we said, for the first time, actually being at a club situation. And having said all of that, one of the proudest moments of my life was getting on the plane and coming back in 1996 to help start Major League Soccer. And we all knew, we talked about it in the back of buses and on airplanes and hotels, about a league of our own. And we also knew that if this league was going to go, we needed to help and we needed to be a part of it. And I don't begrudge any of the players that stayed and did whatever. That's fine. But for me, it was important so that many years from now, like I'm doing right now, I'm able to talk about what we did and have a pride that we didn't know if it was going to exist or continue. But I never wanted to say that I didn't do everything to help it be successful, and not just successful for my career that I played in MLS, but for well after it and last my lifetime and beyond. And that's there's not many times you get to be the start of something from the beginning, and it was really enticing to a lot of us to do that.
What's your best recollection of what it was like to play Major League Soccer during those formative years?
Yeah, so I got on that plane and I had success in Italy, and and I had learned so much. And then you're plopped back down into an American culture that, while it had moved forward, it still wasn't obviously Italy or any place like that. And so it was a very Wild West type of existence, especially in the early days, on and off the field. We were making it up as we went along, and that can at times make you incredibly creative and produce some really interesting things, and at times it can send you down some different directions. And so whether it was trying different things like the clock counting backwards, or the old 35-yard shootout, and these types of things that ultimately went away, or the aesthetic in the way that we looked, the whole 90s garb and all that kind of stuff, there was just a lot of stuff that we were trying. And I'd be lying if I told you that we thought we'd be here 25, or that we thought we would be and look like this 25 years down the line.
Well, there
There
had
was
to be some
cautious,
concern it was going to be NASL 2.0.
yeah, but
It's
there
not
was
all-
cautious optimism. I mean,
Right.
you've been around, you understand that our history is littered with defunct leagues and teams and that kind of stuff. So it was difficult to comprehend or picture what we see now, especially when it comes to the infrastructure and the players and the money and the broadcast and all the kind of stuff that you have right now. But it was La Cosa Nostra. It was our thing, and it was a labor of love from the very beginning.
And now look at it today. It's just incredible how far it's come. And whether it be a player or as an executive, you've been part of all kinds of formative moments for this league. And I'm just going to skip forward a little bit because you were president of the Los Angeles Galaxy at the time when David Beckham was brought to Major League Soccer. And that coincided with some real positive expansion in the league, including right where I am right now here in Toronto. It just seemed like that was the year where everything just stepped up and took the league to another level.
Yeah, there's before David Beckham and after David Beckham, and I was, incredibly, you know, privileged to be a part of that. So when I finished in 2003, oftentimes, because there's young players that'll ask me, what should I do? And I say, listen, if you see a jumping off point, because guess what, your career is not going to end the way that you want it. Okay, that happens to a minute percentage of actual players. All right, so if you see a jumping off opportunity, recognize. First off, you got to be able to see it, and then you have to be able to take it because that door might open up for you as a former player, but it's only going to stay open for so long. And so an opportunity came to, like you said, go into the front offices. And I went up to San Jose, and I went to three really distinct and different type of challenges. Up in San Jose, where the team was in the process of moving to Houston. Then I went out to New York with the Metro Stars that was in the process of becoming the Red Bulls. And then I came back to Los Angeles, where I was part of the hurricane of David Beckham. And look, it was a hurricane, and it was like unlike anything else that any team had experienced before. We had to go through it, I think, to get to the other side, but there was a lot of collateral damage, including myself getting fired after a few years because, we were trying to figure it out. And David Beckham, the brand of Beckham, I mean, it sucks the air out of every room. And you got to figure out a way to be a club where one of your players, their brand is bigger than what you are. And that's not easy. But that's why I always talked about the creation of the super club and the whole concept of the super club. And that was my drive from the start is when people think about a club in the United States and in North America and in MLS, the club I want them to think about, in this case, it would have been the Los Angeles Galaxy. How do you do that? Well, you go get David Beckham. With all the challenges, it was the right thing to do, money well spent. And when people around the world and in the United States thought about Major League Soccer, they thought about the Los Angeles Galaxy.
It was box office stuff. Wherever you went, sold out crowds. Um, and David himself was a good ambassador for the league. I remember when he came up to Toronto and he
Oh,
was
yeah.
behind the scenes, but he would sneak out and go to the children's hospital here. And he wouldn't do it announced. He would go out of his way to do little things like that. It costs a lot of money to bring David to Major League Soccer, but it was all well worth it, wasn't it? Like,
Absolutely.
is there a
Absolutely.
dollar amount that you wouldn't pay to get what kind of happened after?
I still say to this day, there's nobody, even with all due respect to Messi and Cristiano, even if you brought them over, they still don't have that impact. Look, the soccer people are going to come, okay? It's about getting the other people into that tent. And nobody transcended the sport the way David Beckham did. And it goes back to something we talked about earlier. David Beckham, you can talk about what he is or what he isn't and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately he understood that his responsibility went well beyond what he
Yes.
did on the field, and he embraced it, and he did it better than a lot of players that I've ever seen in terms of the way that he did it, the promotion, the press, and the recognition that this power that he had, that he leveraged obviously for himself too, but this is what was being paid for and bought when he came to a place, that he had a responsibility to make sure that he manufactured that and used it to the advantage of the people that were paying him. And he did that on a consistent basis. And by the way, ultimately got it right on the field and won MLS Cup
No
too.
kidding. And what's amazing to me, and I'm interested, were you part of the negotiating process where he received first right of refusal for a future club or a future
Yeah, yeah.
franchise? Because, I mean, I don't know if MLS goes and dangles that carrot again. What if Lionel Messi comes and says, if I can have my own club at some point, or Cristiano Ronaldo, do the same deal?
I don't think so. I mean, it was incredibly smart by his people to do that.
Yes.
Someone asked me the other day, "Would you regret anything?" That's the one thing. I wish I had had that clause when I came back to MLS. And it looks incredibly smart right now, but it was something to have. And once again, while he got it at a bargain rate, the reality is what we got as a league and as a club, well worth it. So he is one of the few, if not the only person that would get that, especially now when you got the thing going for, 300 and we're up to $300 million now, just an expansion fee. And then you got to have stadiums and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, David did exercise that and now is in MLS with Inter Miami. And so that's a good thing for the league to have David Beckham continuing as an owner. But it was, it was crazy, crazy. I remember that trip to Toronto early on, and it was just absolutely nutty. And I was trying to keep this team together with the recognition that there was so much focus and attention on him, and yet we still had to win games in a league that we also know prides itself on the manufactured parity. It isn't, he wasn't playing at Real Madrid, okay, where one team was so much better than everybody else that they stepped on the field and 70% of the time they knew they were going to win just because they had better players out there. That's not the case of MLS, as you know, and everybody that follows MLS does. So it's all fine and well to sell a lot of tickets and to be very high profile, but when the whistle blows, the differences between teams, and even now there's been a little bit of separation, and some of that super clubbish type of thing has happened, but still relative to other leagues around the world, that parity is still really, really unique when it comes to Major League Soccer.
Did you get on well with David? Like, I'm a huge fan. I'm a United supporter, right? So he can do no wrong in my eyes. But how about you? Did you get on well with him?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. I'll be honest with you, it was hard working through his team because
Right.
his team was involved in everything, and it was, I was constantly doing that push and pull of trying to maintain some autonomy for the Galaxy and the brand of the Galaxy, and understanding that we had to respect the fact that the fuel that was fueling the Galaxy at that time came from Beckham. And that wasn't easy. And by the way, and I was 33 when I first started in the front offices. I was young, I had no experience at all, I made lots of mistakes. I don't regret it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I learned a tremendous amount about the business of soccer from the men and women that work day in and day out at selling this sport. And with David Beckham, it gets a lot easier, but the reality is that this is a day in and day out type of slog in order to sell the game. It's gotten better, but it's still not easy. And I learned a whole lot about business in general, and certainly the business of soccer. But trying to steer the Beckham hurricane and protect everybody else from it, I did it. I did it well at time. I got it right off the field in terms of monetizing what David Beckham brought. I mean, we made lots of money, and I'm incredibly proud of that because that wasn't even necessarily in my wheelhouse. But the on-field product is where it struggled, and you got to have both. So that balance was off. Ultimately, I got fired. Bruce Arena came in and did a great job of cleaning up the situation on the field and getting that team to where it needed to be. And then you're cooking, with all steam right there
Sure.
with both sides.
I'll get to Bruce Arena and the U.S. men's national team. Just have about 10, 15 minutes left because I want to. You're obviously such a big voice in the North American game today. You transition. You've had an outstanding career as a commentator, as an analyst, now with Fox Soccer. And I just wonder, MLS celebrating 25 years. What do you make of where the league is today? What it needs to do, perhaps, to take the next step in its evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just in soccer in general, I think in North America, we love to kick ourselves for what we haven't done or what we aren't. And I think at times we also have to pat ourselves on the back for how far we've come
That's
on and off the field. We still got a long way to go, and we're certainly not perfect. But relative to other leagues and other sports and other cultures, it's pretty unprecedented how far we have come. The other part of it is the ownership. I love I'm not talking about owners of the teams, just the ownership of this sport and the ownership of something like Major League Soccer. It is always going to be uniquely North American, and that's not something to be feared. That's actually something to be celebrated. It doesn't mean that we're going to do stuff differently just to do stuff differently. But you know what? Because we don't have that, and I'll use this word baggage, if you will, of a history, it gives us some advantage to be able to kind of pick and choose and create something really unique and different. Doesn't mean that we're not part of the game and that the world plays, but we also recognize that it is a little apples and oranges. People always talk about, I'm sure they do it in Canada too. Why can Iceland do it, but the U.S. can't do it, or Canada do
sure.
it? But it's completely different, all right? Especially when you look at the makeup of a country like Canada or like the United States. One of the things that I think makes the United States one of the greatest countries in the world is our diversity. But it also means that there's that diversity of thought. And that means everybody thinks about the game differently. You might look at the game and think that that's beautiful. I might look at it and say that's ugly. So getting everybody to head in the same direction in a country that is so diverse of its thought makes it very, very difficult to head in a direction. I don't know if it's the right direction, but to head in one single direction is very, very difficult. So, these are all challenges that we're not going to solve or overcome in a matter of a day or a year or something like
The
that.
one thing
But
that
it's
makes
gotten
it
better.
the one thing that makes it more distinct, though, central ownership in the league, a salary cap, but considering what we're going through as a global population today, perhaps these safeguards are necessary, and MLS might end up leading in a way as the world, this post-soccer world after this pandemic, kind of evolves into something potentially different.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, and that's incredibly, smart comment. And who knows if it comes to fruition, but when we look at the structure of Major League Soccer that gets so much attention because of its unique aspect with the single entity and with that manufactured parity and with the salary cap and without promotion relegation, all that kind of stuff, a lot of people bristle at it. And a lot of people say, why don't you just do it like that over there? And yet, that's the reason why Major League Soccer is into its 25th year and why it has been able to survive and in some cases thrive is specifically because they went about it in a way different than it had been done in the past. And that's what's the business structure of it has enabled it to succeed. And I know there's other people that say, yeah, but you got to make it open and anybody can be in it. That's fine. When it comes to something like promotion relegation or any type of mirroring of what happens someplace else, I say, go ahead. You want to build a better mousetrap? Let the customer decide. The market will decide out there. I will support it. Look, I don't care if it's men's, women's, or naked. If people are playing soccer and they want to have a league or do something, I will support it. But what I don't want is to people to mandate that this business should run like that. And MLS is a business. This is what they believe is best. They've had some success right now. And I want to respect the fact that that's what they want to do. And I don't want anybody telling me or you or MLS or anybody else how to run their business. If they run it into the ground, they run it into the ground.
I'm curious your thoughts on the three Canadian club teams, because obviously a lot of the time when you get coverage south of the border, it's obviously focused on the American teams. But what's your perception of the three Canadian teams and where they stand right now?
So, I mean, if you want a pecking order right now, I think it would be obviously Toronto at the top. Maybe not obviously to everybody, but Toronto at the top. I think then it becomes Vancouver, and then it becomes then it becomes Montreal. You know, the Toronto impact, and I know I'm using that word, but the impact that Toronto had, not the Montreal impact,
Yes.
but the impact that Toronto had on the league cannot be overstated. It was wonderful. And I know the early days were difficult, but they fixed that. But just to see what not just Toronto, but Canada embracing that and saying, "Wow, this is something that can happen." That's wonderful. And I don't know what happens in the future. Obviously, those three teams are part of Major League Soccer right now, but Canada, I know this comes at a horrible time right now in terms of the work that's going on for the league there. And who knows what happens in the future, and who knows if maybe Mexico's involved, Canada's involved, we're involved. Maybe have this huge super league, and when whatever it ends up looking. But look, it is not for the faint of heart, a professional soccer league in any era and in any country right now. But as far as the MLS teams from Canada, I think they make us a better league from a competition perspective on the field, and I think they make us a better league off the field because of all three distinct and unique type of cultures. The supporters, the aesthetic, all of that different kind of stuff, and a history over the top of whether it's Vancouver and Alfonso Davies or the youth system that they have up there. And I've spent a lot of time up there. I was there for the Women's World Cup and spent a month and a half living in Vancouver and seeing what that city is and how awesome it is, or whether it's Toronto and the juggernaut that they have been, or whether it's Montreal and the whole the French Canadian type of thing that's completely different and unique. I love that diversity when it comes to Major League Soccer, and we don't have as much without the Canadian teams.
Absolutely. I don't know, famously or infamously, we actually played the 2-0 Canada winner of the US men's national team on Tuesday night after my interview with John Herdman. Said there wasn't anything you could say really about Canada beating the United States for the first time in 34 years because it was a real complete performance by the Canadian team and they simply outplayed the US that night. Is the gap closing? I know you're being critical, and a lot of people have, about a lot of things that are going on in U.S. soccer
Mhm.
right now. And does that maybe open up a window of opportunity for the Canadian men?
Oh yeah, I mean, if I was Canada, I would be smelling some blood because your U.S. team is at I don't know if it's the all-time low, but it's certainly much lower than it has been in a long time. I guess in 2017, that moment of not qualifying was the all-time low, and it's started to creep up there. And Greg Berhalter's done some different things, and then you have that result, and that was comprehensive. That was a Canadian team playing a way that I haven't seen Canada play in a while. And so that was good to see. The problem is that if the hex shakes out the way that people are talking about it right now, it looks like that Canada gets left out and is going to have to go the long way. It doesn't mean they can't do it, but it's a real long way to try to get back to qualifying. I look. I don't want to wait for 2026 to see Canada in a World Cup. I would love for them to find a way if it ends up being the hex, fine. If it doesn't, then you take that long way for them to find a way to come through because some of the players that you have, and let's be honest, this hasn't necessarily been about the players. It's about the team. And I saw a real team performance when they beat the United States. I saw an understanding of how they wanted to play, all the words that we throw out there, spirit and all that kind of stuff. That's all fine and well, and that was there, but you got to be able to play the game. And they really had an understanding of how they wanted to go out and beat a United States.
It just seems like it up here, a lot of people, rightfully so excited about a potential generational talent like Alfonso Davies. The U.S. has brought through a lot of players that have had all kinds of reputation as they move forward. But when you look at Davies and this young crop of Canadians, what do you see coming down the American pipeline, and how long will it be to transition from a group that did well for a certain period of time in the U.S. men's national team program to the new blood that can maybe even take them a step further?
Yeah, this is where this cascade effect of what we are going through this crisis right now, because I was really looking forward to seeing this Olympic team qualify. For the last two cycles they haven't been, and it's a real lost opportunity not qualifying for an Olympics because I mentioned early in this program in 1992, myself, Kobe Jones, Mike Lapper, Brad Friedel, all of these players, we were on that Olympic team, and that's where we were seen, and then we were brought up almost as a group to the full national team, matriculated up, and we've lost out on that opportunity and that experience that they have. So when I look at some of the younger players, either on that Olympic team or guys like Gio Reyna over there at Borussia Dortmund and that kind of stuff. I mean, there is some real talent out there. But I would only say this and caution with this is that talented players, okay, you can make as many talented players as you want. When it comes to a national team, though, where you need 11 players uh, playing together on a field, it's not about the best players. It's about the best collection of players. And I know that scares us at times because it means there could possibly be some very good players that don't fit. And I think for so long, when it comes to the United States, we've tried to be everything to everybody. And while that's admirable, I think it just wastes time and resources. And that's why I say I'd rather have somebody with a flawed plan, or I believe is a flawed plan, than no plan at all. Greg Berhalter, I think he has a plan. Not everybody's going to fit. Even good players, guys that are making lots of money or high profile or playing at big clubs. You know what? If 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 Canada doesn't believe, okay, that Alfonso Davies can play in the way that the coach wants him to play for the national team, then he shouldn't be with the national team. Okay. Now look, he's a wonderful player, and you're going to adjust accordingly, and he's going to be there. But I'm being a little bit flip, but that's that's sometimes hard for us to understand. But I do believe that that is the way to success. Saying this is how we're going to play, come hell or high water, and I want the players that can play in that. And if they can't play in that, either they're not going to be involved or they have to adjust to be in that.
That's the exact conversation that's being had up here right now. It's not if Alfonso Davies will play, it's where he should play. So no matter how good you are, that conversation's still going to exist. We have about a minute left. I wanted to show this to our viewers on Spotify.
Oh, there we
Alexi
go. Yeah.
Lalas has a new album. Well, I think it was released in 2019, correct? Look at you. And look at you, Alexi, doing your solo thing right now. I read that back in 1998, you and your band, you traveled and toured with Hootie and the Blowfish.
I did, yeah. So I put out an album back in 1998, and music has been a huge part of my life for all of my life, even before I was kicking a soccer ball, and certainly after I'm kicking a soccer ball. I'm sitting in front of a Pro Tools session right here, working on music in the studio here, and it's something that I love, something I always took as seriously as playing soccer. I continue to write and release and record and perform music. In 98, yeah, I toured with Hootie. It was great. We had such a good time opening up for them in Europe and going all over the place. So look, as I said, when we started this conversation, I consider myself a performer and an entertainer. I make plenty of mistakes. I am certainly not perfect. I got a long way to go as a human being, as a musician, as a broadcaster, as a father, as a husband, all of those different things. This is a work in progress, but all of these things matter to me. I have a passion for all of these things. I take, what I do seriously, whether it's my work or whether it's music or anything else, but I don't take myself too seriously. So, that's the way that it goes. And, when it comes to the music, you can check it out. It's all on all the different platforms out there, Spotify and iTunes and all that kind of stuff. I keep releasing just straight ahead pop rock music that you put in your car, you turn up loud, you put the windows down, and off you go.
Awesome. Awesome. And we'll all be out there somewhere else other than our homes in the not so distant future. Forget about the Disseckies guy. You are the most interesting man in the world. I'm
I
pretty
don't know
sure
about
there,
that.
Alexi. Follow him on Twitter at Alexi Lalas, Fox Soccer, the Alexi Lalas State of the Union podcast. It's a must listen to, must subscribe. Check him on Facebook as well. He's basically everywhere. I can't thank you enough for doing this. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I mean, a lot of times those of us that kick a ball get a lot of credit for different stuff, and the reality is that all of this matters. And so,
Yeah.
thank you for what you do, what everybody is doing out there. Just to reiterate, I hope everybody is staying safe and sane in these crazy, crazy times. We are living through a piece of history, and hopefully we'll be through it and back to some new normal. And hopefully that new normal has the game that we love, where people are kicking a ball and I'm screaming and yelling about it.
Well said. He is Alexi Lalas at Alexi Lalas. I want to thank Armin, David, Kurt, for everyone putting this together tonight. We'll be back on Tuesday night. Jack Collison, former Welsh international, now a coach with Atlanta United, will be joining us on Tuesday night. Coming up next, right here on the One Soccer YouTube channel, Canada, our women's national team, a replay of their. Well, I won't give you the result of their performance against Brazil from just this past month. So that's coming up next. We'll see you again next Tuesday night right here on One Soccer. And in the meantime, stay home and stay safe, Canada.